Welcome to the What's Lacking podcast. It's your host, Larry Atencio. With me today is Miguel Reyes. How are you, Miguel?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing pretty well. So this is your second appearance. Just like Jordy's episode, you are coming back to the What's Lacking podcast, so that we can have an episode on video as well as audio. The original few episodes were only in audio format, and I've since expanded my quote unquote podcast empire onto YouTube. So,
The expansion.
yeah, exactly. I think we recorded maybe like 2 years ago. I think you were
Yeah.
the third person to be featured. What have you been up to in the last 2 years?
Ooh, a lot. I guess to start things off, I've been jumping between so many different companies, to be honest. A few, maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I've been jumping between a handful of different companies, two or three over the last 2 years, just like really trying to find a sense of fulfillment. Haven't found it yet, but we've made some strides and a lot of progress. Really just been focused on, just continuing to grow through work, grow through my hobbies and just living life.
After mentioning hobbies, what are those?
Hobbies, I mean, there's some that have always stuck with me. Dancing, for example, has been one that I've been doing since I was in high school, maybe even before that. But as of recently, I started playing a little bit of pinball. That's been really cool. Just like classic old games, and snowboarding. Snowboarding has been something I feel like I've been putting a lot more time into. So it's been really interesting. Just like a whole different type of muscle memory. That's been really the main things. I feel like I always just try to dabble in different arts, but it's always just come back to dance music, really.
What type of dance do you do?
Freestyle, breakdancing, mostly hip hop. In the last 2 years, I actually started to do more house dancing, which originated in Chicago through the LGBTQ community. And it was kind of like a warehouse scene. And that's something that has developed more in Seattle. And I started to kind of tap into that side of myself a little bit more in terms of just like the dance style, learning about the culture. And it's interesting because I feel like around the late 80s to early 90s, breakdancing and house both they started to find like a middle ground. Those worlds started to blend together and create or develop that style even further. So yeah, those have been really mainly the type of dances I've done.
Are they similar? Is there some sort of like cross pollination and sort of synthesis between the two, or
Yeah,
they're pretty separate?
pretty separate, but there are inspirations from both ends. House dancing involves the focus on house is mostly around like flow, rhythm, feeling, and it's really like more step based. So thinking like salsa or
Okay.
bachata, that it's very footwork heavy in that sense. As to breaking, it's more grounded, it's more dynamic, where you're on the floor, you're rolling around, you're spinning. And I think with the idea of breaking it, it's because it's developed in a certain period where communities were struggling. I think the sense of breaking really focused around like battle mentality or trying to let go of certain feelings like anger or sadness and things like that.
That's a good analysis of both dance
Yeah.
forms. Transitioning, what does it mean for you to be a good person?
I don't know. I feel like there's a lot like I don't know. It depends on what people see as good. I think I hear a lot of times people say, "Oh, it's a battle between good and evil." But in a world where I think a lot of people are just doing what's good for them, it's like how do you what determines what's bad? And I thought about this a little bit more, and I just think the first thing that came to mind is like someone who isn't selfish, someone who is empathetic, someone who just likes to spread joy, happiness. And I think the one that really stood out to me is just someone who's authentic. And I think that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. It's like from one perspective, this person could be bad, but they might be, from another perspective, someone could say that person is good. And I think it just comes down to that authenticity. Like, what are you doing it for? What is your goal with doing something like this? And then it could be a lot of things, I think. And that just might be scratching the surface, but I think those are at least some of the traits that define what a good person would be in terms of, at least from my opinion.
Right. And how would you define authenticity? Is it something that you have within you and you discover, or is something that you just need to create as you mature and get older?
I feel like it's something that's already with you. And as you get older, it's not necessarily something you create, but something you recognize more. Almost like having a like it's like your conscious where you have that voice in your head. I feel like that authenticity, it's like overlaps with just like your intuition. Like this feels like it should be right. I think there's some morality in that and things and a lot of other things that go into it. But ultimately, it to me, authenticity is just being able to do something without thinking of a reward, without having any expectation, doing something in it, and truly just being confident with that being a part of you. It's something that you're doing this because it's who you are.
What has been giving your life meaning and purpose?
No, there's a handful of things, but I think it centers around family, and that might be because my culture, I feel like Filipino communities are very family oriented. But I find that like as of maybe the last 5 years or so, as I like to see my nieces grow up, it's helped develop like a new meaning of my purpose or life to me in a way. And an example of that is like holidays, for example. Like I never really enjoyed Christmas or certain holidays that I felt were a little forced. But as I see like my nieces grow and like experience these things, it's a bit refreshing, and I feel like it's giving me a bit of drive to do more things for myself and to kind of like exemplify like this is what it means to be successful or to be happy and things like that, and like lead by action in a way. But going back to like that just like meaning to life and what my like my purpose is today, being that figure or that leader in a sense that I want my family to feel comfortable. I want them to feel safe and happy, and if I could be successful and provide that, then I think that gives me a lot of fulfillment and a lot of meaning.
Okay, so you want to be a figure and leader for your current existing family, or were you meaning to say that looking forward to having your own family as a father, being able to provide and be a figure of authority for your own family?
Yeah, I think it leads into that. As of today, it would be just my immediate family that I think about. And even beyond that, I would say being that type of person in my community, especially as a dancer, I feel like I'm heavily involved in a lot of different communities as I like travel around and experience the different scenes and communities in the dance world around the country. But I take all that as fuel just to like try to be a better person. And I think ultimately down the line, I would want to I want to be there, and be that type of person for my future family if that's part of my life. But yeah, I think as of today, that's kind of where it starts, and then down the line, I think that's where it'll lead to.
Okay. What does it mean to be happy?
It's what you make of it, really. There's a lot of things that I feel like I've taken for granted over the last few years or just throughout my life, really. And I realized, like, going back to the fact that, like, I've traveled and seen a lot of different communities and even gone back home to visit family in the Philippines. You see so many people who have less than you or have more than you. And it never truly defines, like, how happy they are. And so I feel like it's always just a perception that you have on your life and the position that you're in. Like, you can make the most out of whatever you have.
Are you happy today?
Oh yeah, I'm very happy. I'm
Not
very
like right
satisfied with
now
where
because
I
you're having coffee, which makes me very happy. But
am.
just in general, like, are you happy in your current life situation, and or is this a valley in that happiness feeling?
Yeah. What's interesting is that when I think about our last podcast 2 years ago, it was coming out of COVID and I was struggling with my career path and trying to recreate myself in a sense and chase fulfillment. And I think that put me in my head a lot in a way that I felt a little bit unhappy, maybe even more than that. And I think within those 2 years since, and I would say, yeah, I feel like I got myself to a spot where I'm pretty happy. Yeah, I got into a relationship. I've started to explore and experience a lot of new things. I started doing festivals again, and I've been a while since I've done that. I turned 30, and I went to travel to Japan, and just a lot of different experiences. There's so many things that I think you'll meet even more in that way.
Sounds like you have plenty of reasons to be happy or happier today, right now, in general. How
Yeah,
many close friends do you have?
that's a tough one. See, so I personally am just, I guess, personable. A lot of people like to describe me as that, where I could just, make a lot of friends. But I also feel that I am also like a very authentic person as well. Like I can't just like force a good friendship or a close friendship. So sometimes in my head, and the reason why I'm saying it, I'm, starting off with this is because I feel like there's times in my head where I feel like I have more close friends than I do. And then there's other times where I'm like, I could probably think of like three that they're truly my close friends. But to give you a short answer, I'd probably say like five close friends.
You could give me the long answer as well. This is your time.
Yeah.
You're being spotlighted. We want to hear what you have to
Well,
say.
the other
So
thing to it though, right, is like those, I could say like today I have five close friends, but with the type of friendships I have too, it's like we all are moving through different locations, prioritizing different things in our lives. So sometimes what means to be a close friend, it doesn't look like that, right? Like we might not be talking daily or weekly. It might be like 3 months from now is when the next time I see them or something, right? So, but I still consider them a close friend. So
how would you describe those friendships?
I don't know, it's pretty close. I mean, I see a lot of my friends as more of like family than anything, especially the guys. I've never had a brother, so I've always treated a lot of my friends like RJ, Ron, Mariano, just calling out a few people out there, Bill, all those guys. I've known them for so long. It's been like long-term friends that have grown from our history and developed into like a brotherhood, really.
How have you changed in the last few years? And I know you had already mentioned your career and job changes and how you recently got in a relationship, but maybe get into some more internal, mental, intellectual, spiritual changes that you've experienced.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always changing, and that's something that always comes back to my mind. Where I'm very goal oriented, so there's like things that I'm trying to drive myself towards. Like for example, since I moved to Seattle back in 2020, I think my idea of moving here was also a sense of me trying to discipline myself a bit more, get myself away from my comfort zone, that support system that I have at home, which isn't great, but at the same time is like I think a good challenge. And over that time, I feel like it's just left me to think about a lot of things. As a person, I feel like I've been able to grow and have that, really have more discipline with myself, just being intentional about my decisions and just sitting with my thoughts and having to face those head on versus just kind of like brushing them under the rug or ignoring it in any way. I feel like it's made me more vulnerable in a sense as well, especially as I get into a relationship. I think that's been another interesting dynamic. I've always had this perception of you grow the most as an individual when you're by yourself and single, but now that I'm in a relationship, and I've thought of this even before then, but I feel like that having a partner just adds a different dynamic and surfaces a lot of things that you might not have a face initially on your own, So there's a lot of things I think that goes into that, but ultimately I think it just goes back to a sense of discipline that I've developed, the openness to being vulnerable in relationships and just being truthful and honest with myself.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Rich, hopefully.
You're
Just,
already
climbing the corporate ladder.
right, exactly. Good salary, I would say, correct?
Yeah, I would hope so. I don't know, 10 years, I'd be 40 by then, just to I guess I'm giving my age out, so I'm being a little more vulnerable here, but 10 years is a long time and so much could happen. But ideally, in a perfect world, I think I'd want to continue this path and reach, the next level, potentially like VP level, to be honest. If I were to put like a goal to it. But aside from like my career path, I feel like as a person, kind of up in the air really at this point. I think it's something that I still have to discover. And I'm talking more from like a spiritual sense. I kind of have to identify what that is the next level for me. So I think there's a lot of ways I can go about it, but ultimately with my life, I do want to just like start my own business. I want to reach like a mastery level within my art forms, like my dance. And on top of that, I want to make progress with a lot of the other goals that I have, or like the other side hobbies like that I have. So for example, like learning languages, learning music, audio engineering, instruments. So I've been like dabbling, I mentioned this a little bit briefly, but like I've been dabbling with guitars and pianos and music theory, and nothing where I'm like forcing it in a way that I'm like, hey, I have to do this 30 minutes a day. More so just like leave it in the open, spend like 5 minutes on it. Sometimes that 5 minutes turns into 20, turns into 30, but it's something that I'm trying to naturally develop, just kind of like have fun with, rather than think like, hey, I could monetize this and I could be really good at this. Trying to be authentic about, genuine about like the experience.
Yeah, developing different aptitudes and just discovering new avenues of expression, discovering new aspects of the self. I like that a lot too. And I try to do similar things. I love reading, so that's always going to be a part of it.
Yeah.
But this podcast is part of that. And these conversations are also part of that. Just trying to flex different existential muscles so that they, just the living experience doesn't atrophy.
Exactly. the other piece, like you mentioned, like reading and writing, I think that's another one that I'm trying to just be a little bit more consistent with. And, I feel like just reading just fills up your brain and your knowledge so much. And a lot of times, at least from my experience, when I've read certain things, it's opened my mind up even more and made me help me look at things in a different perspective as well. In the past, we've talked a little bit about like synergy or synchronicity, and there's certain books. I think in the first podcast we talked about like my favorite book, and one of them was Siddhartha. And it was interesting because when I read that book, I was living back in Baltimore, and then there was a lot of things I was going through that time. But going back to the synergy part, I read that book. I felt like at a good moment in my life where it's helped me understand things, like certain things how I feel, certain things that I was struggling with in a different way, where it helped me progress and take a little bit inspiration from that, and then just kind of manifested it to my life. I applied some of those learnings, those themes. When I don't force certain things, and when I'm like reading certain things, I kind of just stumble on it. It sometimes just gives me an answer, and I don't know if I'm looking into that, but I think in a sense that could also feel a little spiritual too.
Following your intuition, I think that's a word that you had used previously, and I think getting in touch with one's intuition and one's core authentic self is really important. So yeah, I completely agree. What advice
Yeah.
would you give to people about how to best live their life?
I think one, on the topic of authenticity, going with a genuine mindset, like full confidence of who you are, just send it. Don't let these outer influences, other factors just dictate how you're going to live, or affect how you feel. I think a lot of times, especially in like how we are currently today, like a lot of people could be just reactive. So I think protecting your peace has been something that I found very valuable in just like how I live my life. And yeah, I think that blends into some of those other things, like having that confidence. And I think a lot of people tend to, and I'm generalizing things obviously, but at least from like a personal experience, I think it's easy to get in your head and be your own obstacle. And so I think if you're protecting your peace and you're just kind of like, being confident about your decisions and yourself really, and I think that just sets you up for success in that way.
Yeah, and I want to support your idea of protecting one's peace. I think that should be an important step that everyone should be trying to take, and being cognizant of what we consume, not just in terms of media and books, but also the friends we keep, the conversations we have, the self-talk and the sort of language that we use when thinking about ourselves. And so all those things together make it so that one can be in a much better positive mind state and mindset.
Yeah, and to build on that, something that you mentioned is just like the friends that we make. I feel like finding a sense of belonging carries a lot of weight on just being able to live that best life, right? Like having that support system, having a community. A lot of times it's easy to feel like we're alone, we're taking on the world by ourselves, but in reality, like your mother, your father, your sister, your nieces, nephew, like there's so many people out there who want to see you do your best. And it's easy to just focus on the negative aspect of things, and it's easy to forget that you have those people. Ultimately, I think as humans, having that community, having that family, or that sense of belonging is important.
I think it's also a matter of, like, as my brother said in a previous episode, of choosing happiness, of choosing positivity, of choosing optimism, and
Hmm.
doing your best to make sure that at every moment one is able to put situations, events, ideas, thoughts in perspective, and trying one's best to look for solutions and to frame them in a way that allows for one to become a problem solver, as opposed to the easier sort of response of cynicism and complaining and recriminations, etc. So I think getting in the habit of always choosing and just being conscious of how one frames situations can go a long way in making one happier, better, more peaceful, and
Yeah.
just exude the sort of energy that attracts the same level of positivity from others. And I think that's super important, super hard as well, right? Because dealing with one's emotions and all of the ways in which life is difficult and relationships are difficult and friendships and careers and jobs and deadlines and etc. But as I was saying before, it's sort of making it routine, practicing and flexing those, positivity muscles. So yeah.
Practice is important.
For you, what's more important, individualism or collectivism?
collectivism as in like having like that community or like as a group,
Yeah,
a collective
exactly.
of people. I feel like there's value in both. I kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, where 2 years ago when we initially did this podcast when I was single, and then now talking and I'm in a relationship, I feel like there's different dynamics in both ways where I'm learning different things. And when I think of individualism and collectivism, I think it's good to have a balance. I think everyone needs to have a sense of individuality, accountability, and being able to think independently, but it's more efficient, in my opinion, to work together. There's so many more things that you can get accomplished more efficiently, faster, easier in some ways too. There's a lot of things that I think just as a group, if you're actually working together, then I think it's almost limitless versus like individuality or like individualism. There's definitely a lot of strengths that come out of that. Like not everything can be done in groups, obviously, and being able to be self-sufficient is important. So I would say I definitely lean towards both being equally important.
I agree with that. I think for me, there's strength and beauty in thinking of communities and groups being made up of fully realized, fully developed, strong individuals coordinating and working together towards a goal that, like you said, is more efficiently attained if one uses one's individual prowess in a group setting.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I was gonna say I think of this too in another way where, going back to like some of my hobbies, like dance, for example. Obviously it's very community based. But even like as historically when these dances were being developed, the next generation would always take inspiration from the foundation built from the previous generation. So sometimes like that collectivism might not look like, oh, let's all work together in a group in this present day. Sometimes what if it's like I'm a product of my history of my past, right? Or like the history that's helped set this up, and I've taken inspiration from that, and I've just developed this further or built on top of that. So like that's also a sense of collectivism of like from breakdancing, right? It started what in the 80s, 90s, and it's changed to today, right? Like it's evolved in so many ways, but I feel like I wouldn't have been possible if it was just one person, right? Like
That's true.
it was multiple generations of like adding in their own influences, their own style from other dances, from their culture, and creating it what it is. And I think that's a lot of different art forms.
Yeah, the interplay and dialectical nature of individualism and collectivism working together towards a greater synthetic reality. And I wanted to also say a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. And in dancing and sports and corporations and government, etc., in any collective endeavor, you're only as strong as what the weakest person in that group can bring to the table. And so if we are able to support others in developing themselves and strengthening their abilities, their capacities, capabilities, I think that would, in the long run, lead to greater communities, groups, and collective efforts. It's just,
Yeah.
I think we need to emphasize and sometimes hold ourselves, like you were saying, accountable for self-sufficiency, for making ourselves the best versions that we can possibly be. And sometimes it's easier to just rely on others, rely on tradition, rely on what the group is telling you, instead of having to own our life and what to make of it.
Yeah, pretty much it's to make of it.
Final question: what's your favorite TV show of all time?
Does anime count?
Yeah, any
um,
any show.
I
Neon
guess,
Genesis Evangelion.
have you been looking at my Netflix?
No, I mean I watched that when I'm a little bit older than you are, so
I
yeah,
was actually
I
that's
used to
something
watch
that
that
I've been
show.
watching on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
Like recently, that's been I don't know. Yeah, I don't I feel like last time I was there, I was watching that on your TV. So I didn't know if you were calling that out, but that's a
I
good one.
wasn't. I mean, I do want to call out and give you a shout out for adding us to your Netflix family account, because yeah, we hadn't had Netflix
Struggling.
for years. Not struggling. It's just
No, just yeah. I mean,
prioritizing the media
deprived of
that you
Netflix.
consume, and is the cost worth what Netflix is giving? And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah. And I think they're raising the price too, but that's beside the point. I feel like it hasn't really been until recently that I've been watching TV shows, but the first one that comes to mind is Lovecraft County. And that was a really interesting one. I thought that was well made, well told. And I like the aspect of like sci-fi and horror.
That was on Amazon?
HBO, I think.
HBO, okay.
Or might have been Amazon, but one of those. I think that's one that comes to mind. But if I were to be real, definitely more anime based.
Yeah, good.
And I could give you a whole list, like Berserk from 1997. There's like an original one that they made. Hunter x Hunter, that was also like 96, 97. Yu Yu Hakusho. These were all like more classic 90s anime. I think that's what helped set the foundation for today's anime, to be honest. And then on a lighter end, I think Office was one of those first few shows that I actually watched from beginning to end. And that was actually pretty good, way better than I thought. But yeah, there's a handful, but ultimately I think it's gonna be between Lovecraft County and Yu Yu Hakusho.
And anime. For me, anime is like Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon,
Yeah,
Digimon. But
those were good. I mean, I grew up on those too. So
yeah, you were mentioning shows that sound a lot more sophisticated, and is that true, or they were for kids too?
I would say they were for kids too, or maybe like they've had versions that were watered down and made for kids, but the original ones were definitely a little bit more mature rated.
Yeah, because I hadn't heard of them, and even Neon Genesis Evangelion, which I got into when I was younger, was a kids show, but it was a little bit more mature and had themes that were a little bit more difficult and had more depth than Dragon Ball Z and other shows like that.
Yeah, it's definitely on that level. For sure.
Okay. All right. Well, Miguel, it's been great talking to you. Thank you for your second appearance, and I look forward to a third one down the line.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for the time, and hope you have a good weekend.
All right. Have a good one.